productive. And the other thing is, if there's anyone who didn't pay me before you leave, pay me. All right, good.
So, please, in the back.
Yes, hi. I would look forward to hearing Wendy speak. I'm in education, and what I find is with my work with drama, with youth, and any effort to introduce breath into the curriculum, there is a fairly large resistance. It's just very simple, but I'd like someone on the panel to please address what they think a curriculum of the breath might be, or just simply what of Wright's philosophies and practice would be relevant to those of us who are trying to address this issue of awareness to the breath in learning.
We're breathing as we think.
Excellent.
I think Dr. Schiff can address some of that once he wakes up.
He stops breathing.
I would just quickly suggest, my wife, before she became a midwife, was a dance therapist. And I think the use of dance and movement with particularly adolescents, with anybody really, except me, but you know, the use of dance, movement, and you know, then tends to lead to breath, whether they like it or not, once they get moving. And so I think with adolescents, in my view, if you can get them up and moving, girls usually easier than the boys, but and that raises questions. But is probably one way in, and then I think the rest is for people like you who are doing it to try to figure out ways to invent ways of getting them to let go.
I have several ways that I do it, and I'm sure I won't remember many of them right now. But with little kids, which you don't want that. You want the old.
No, I actually do from grade 1 to
Okay. Oh.
yeah. Oh wait. Grade 12, I guess.
With grade 1, jumping jacks.
Yeah.
So they start breathing in spite of themselves. And
What I really mean to say is
Yeah.
what of Wright's ideas I think these are great ideas. Movement, dance, getting children to move in the classroom. There's even yoga and Tai Chi going on. I just wanted to know what of his theories would relate to that, and how do we foster this conversation, this moment of contact between the teacher and the student, where they're able to say, I'm aware of this. I'm aware of this whole thing. Wow, what could that be?
in Children of the Future, there's a description of his working with an infant around breathing problems. So I would suggest you read the book.
Well, also the heart of orgone begins with breath and deep breathing. And Coley has done a lot of work on embodied learning, which I think is, when she talks in the spring, you'll come back and she'll speak about embodied learning. And, but she's the expert.
She's doing a series.
Other questions, please? And again, please raise your hand so I can just try to moderate here. Dr. Silva.
On the subject of attachment theory,
Yeah.
you touched on something that Bruce mentioned before, just that there's a split and they don't address first puberty, genitality, things like that. I was just wondering, how would you describe maybe a failing of attachment theory because of its failure to go that far, or something, or how it might be different if it didn't avoid that, if it did touch that area, how would it be different?
Well, I mean, it would be different because it would touch that area. It would be different because it would incorporate that part of the child and all our
What's missing from
experience.
attachment theory specifically?
Sexuality.
And
Yeah.
breathing.
What?
And breathing.
Yeah.
More sexuality than the issue of breathing. Actually, Bowlby and Ainsworth and Dan Stern, Dan Stern particularly is very aware of the breadth of the infant and those processes. They just don't, we were just talking about that, Dr. Shipp and I were talking about that this morning, that Bowlby specifically gets very, very clear about not wanting to discuss biologically instinctive behaviors. Or rather, he actually wants to talk about biological behavior, but he doesn't want to talk about instinct. Bowlby himself did not believe in temperament. He makes a very, very telling argument against inborn temperament in organisms. However, I disagree actually with Dr. Shipp in some of the that Bowlby, unlike most of the others, actually does not really veer that far away from the fact that sexuality plays an active part in attachment and attachment interaction. He doesn't see it at all in quite the in terms of genitality the way Reich does, but he definitely sees that there is a specific function to the pleasurable interaction between caregiver, primary caregiver, and child, and the attachment, the regulation of attachment between, activation of attachment and deactivation of attachment, and the active interaction between the couple produces in the secure sensation a pleasurable sensation that has parallels to other pleasurable sensations in the biological organism. So Bowlby gets closer. What's happened is, and Bowlby also, don't forget, comes from, I don't want, you can time me, I don't know. Okay. Bowlby comes from a deep relationship to a lot of what Freud was talking about, and worked with Neil as a young man, and was very interested in these processes. He simply doesn't go as far as he needs, as possibly we would want him to go. So I think that there's nothing in attachment theory itself. What's happened subsequently is attachment theory has become the hot topic recently, has been a way of getting away, as always has been the case. It was the case with Reich, even as they began to take Reich on more seriously in mainstream psychiatry, or even psychoanalysis, is to desexual, to get away from the messy stuff.
Right.
To sort of put that, either to dismiss it or to ignore it or to, that's what happens. In Bowlby, it's a lot more, central to this than when you get to people like Schur, and Siegel and others who attachment in neurology and neurosciences, who look for, well, it's all about this, the chemical reaction to this and that, and it has nothing to, we don't have to really look at what's actually going on in the interpersonal.
Dorothy also wants to speak to this. I want to give, again, with questions, I want to give priority to people who haven't yet asked questions. And then I'll come back to others. Go ahead, Dorothy.
I work a lot with kids from the age of 1 or 2 to 6. That's like my primary practice. And so I hear a lot about their genital development, play, etc. I deal mostly with mothers who are very sophisticated, well-educated, and supportive of their children. They read all the books. They do the best they can. They're really sweet. And they won't tell a child that they're bad for masturbating. They'll just say, do it in private. But they can't help but communicate a negativity. And as they do, the kid starts to shut down. And you hear often, I'll say, does your son or your daughter masturbate? And they'll say no. And immediately I know that the kid, it takes that long for a kid to get a message about what's wrong. And another way it plays out, and this goes back to how attachment theory, we get stuck if we don't go beyond that. They often get constipated and have trouble with toilet training. It's called functional endocrisis. And so just as they're hitting the genital stage, maybe they haven't accomplished the toilet training and then they're stuck.
Okay, other questions from people that haven't yet asked one, besides David and sir in the back, I forgot your name, but tell me.
Phil.
Phil.
I'm just a little curious on a mercenary level. Wilhelm Reich fund Organon in the beginning and published those 4 books that he took you with from 48 to 51. Was it donations? Was it the work that he did? Was it, I don't know how do you do it?
Yeah, this is, well, maybe Kevin can speak better to this, but you want to speak to this, or do you want me to, or?
I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, for one thing, there was the Brinks robbery occurred early in
Right.
Ford's.
Eventually, right?
He was a therapist, and people paid him for therapy, and he poured all of the money into. He also had some patients who were very supportive of his work. So, for example, the buying of the property at Organon
Right.
was helped by an individual who gave a good sum of money. But also, people would pay him for trainings and the like.
Yeah.
And then the books were actually selling quite a bit at one point. Remember, these were self-published, so the profit was coming.
Was it through accumulator sales and things like that?
Accumulators were rented, and that was a very small part of the income.
Well, I don't know, there was 1 year there. No, actually, everything you say is accurate, but the
Can
accumulators.
you touch me?
I will. No, accumulator sales did have something to do with it, but I'm not saying it's the largest percentage. I think the most they ever sold in 1 year was accumulators or rentals. I think it might have brought in 20 grand 1 year. That's a pretty good amount by then.
Back then, yes.
But you can't say, and I think maybe government people tried to make the case that so much of it was being funded by that. That was just a part of it. But everything Phil said is exactly right. Reich was just pushing back all the money he was making as a teacher or a therapist back into the business, so-called.
Yes.
And the physicians and many of their students were also making donations. Now, it's very interesting. I listened to one of the audio tapes in which Reich is talking to a group of people, and I guess it was a misperceptions that people were required to give him money. In fact, he would give back money sometimes when people were sending it for what he felt were the wrong reasons or wrong motivations. You know, he wanted people, if you feel like giving something, that's fine, then give it, but it was not some sort of requirement. But that's why when you look at some of these financial files in there, which sound rather dry, that you're amazed that he did this.
Yeah.
You should be amazed.
I
I'm
know.
amazed.
No,
Still don't know how
It takes
he.
money to do.
It is unbelievable, all the different, all the different logistical, day-to-day things that were going on in the laboratory. The property cost was, as Phil said, was bought for $4,000. Talked the woman down from $5,000, which still was a song. And the observatory was built for, I think, what would be the equivalent of several $100,000 today. So it was a lot of different things. Quite an operation.
Yes.
One other point, and we heard this from Håvard Nielsen when he was here, when in Oslo, Reich had, again, through patient and connections, happened to have some patients who had deep pockets. Because the equipment that Reich used when he first started to do the biological work was absolutely state-of-the-art. He wasn't the very first, but he was very close to being the first person to do time-lapse photography of cellular structures. And to set up that equipment, cost lots and lots of whatever they were using in Norway, I think, Norwegian francs or whatever. But it was there was never government funding.
Yeah.
He did apply for a Rockefeller Foundation grant at one point and was turned down in the late 30s, and Jim Strick has spoken about this on other occasions. Other questions? You got to speak to this.
To that, Dr. Sobey, who worked with Reich, wanted to get some other insight in terms of where the doctor's experience is. Reich was very clear that if you worked with him, you were not working with him to earn a living. So, and that since you were working with him, what you earned yourself and some part of what you earned should go back into the work, either in terms of your time, if not actual money. He set fees for the doctors who worked with him, by the way. He would not allow, if he found out you were charging more than a certain fee, he would call you in. The other thing is, he was very typical. He say, we need a new microscope to do X, Y, or Z. It was very clear to everybody, including himself, that meant everybody had to work on finding a way to to get the money to get that new microscope, and it was, he would go in as much as anybody else. And from what Dr. Sobey and Dr. Handelman and a number of other people, Michael Rothenberg said, people just understood that it was a project that everybody was involved in, so it was not, and as old, and I think, Kevin Hitchie can agree, when the case was over, when Reich died, the estate was in economic shambles. I mean, this was not someone who would run some profitable operation to gain money. If it is, no one's found it in the archive.
Kevin, one other point. Kevin.
No, what Harry says is exactly right. Just two things. At some point during the legal case, Reich had made an estimate of what he had donated out of his own pocket to Oregon research. And at that point, so what you're really talking about is maybe 22 years of research, 34, 35, 56 maybe, 55, 56. And saying that's why it was so ridiculous to think that he was in some profit-making thing. And he had estimated, and it's in one of the writings there, that he had donated $350,000. Now that's 1950s money. So if you multiply that by around 8, you're coming in close to $3 million of his own money over a period of about 20 years. So he was really committed to this sort of thing. And then in reference to what Harry just said, when he died and everything was probated and all those sorts of things, and $823, was left, to get things going.
Other people haven't yet had a chance to, yes, please.
How have you been working around parental limitations?
How what?
How have you been working around parental limitations when you're working with this?
Parental inhibition?
Limitations, their own limitations and how that, affects.
That's life. I think the hardest thing I ever had to do was learn to treat parents with respect and understanding and sympathy and non-judgmental, non-critical. If I can't support the parents, the kid is not going to get better. So I have to figure out what the parent needs from me. And it goes so far, I mean, you're going to think I'm nuts, but that's why I'm in this. I will send emails home to mothers, keep the faith, keep it going, whatever the message is, or call them at home, or tell them to call me whenever they need to. I mean, it's a constant keeping them up so that they can do the job. And
Do you ever refer them out for therapy?
yeah, sometimes, or the parents for couples therapy a lot. And I do a lot of educational work. I really say in the very beginning, look, we're part of a team. You've got them 99% of the time. I have 1 hour, and we're going to have to work together. We've got to get a plan, and we'll check in and see how it's going. So it's a team effort.
And are your parents there for the therapy as well? You kind of keep them?
Sometimes they'll say, can I see you instead, or in addition, or whatever, yeah.
But when you're working with their children, are they often there observing?
Oh, yeah. Especially for legal reasons, I like the parents to be there when I'm touching the children, because I don't want to come back on me. So I always make sure a mother or father's in the room with me, and I often say, look, this is what I'm about to do. I'm going to touch your child, and I'll say, may I demonstrate on you? And I demonstrate it usually on the mother, and then they're comfortable. And I know that they're sane or I wouldn't do it.
And you kind of teach them ways to work with it.
Yeah, I teach a lot of parent management skills. I teach infant massage a lot. You can get terrific books now. There's at least 20 books out now on infant massage. Yeah, I teach them everything I know to help.
Alice, you had a question?
I'm curious how these parents come to it. How do they know about this?
Mostly, did you all hear the question? How do I get the referral? Mostly from pediatricians, and then my name just kind of passes around. Like, say a doctor has a kid who's having trouble at school, or got kicked out of daycare, or is having temper tantrums all the time, or is going through a medical procedure, whatever, then they'll send the kid to me.
Have you heard of early intervention?
Early intervention to me is the most important program in America financed by the United States government. Does everybody know what it is?
No.
Briefly, please.
0 to 30 months It provides 11 disciplines to help any child. So it's nutrition, social work, pediatrics, physical therapy, occupational therapy, psychology, you name it. Anything they can throw at a newborn to help that child. And no money spared. It's just wonderful.
Along with that is, my wife is one of the clinical directors of another program called the Nurse Family Partnership, which takes, came out of the University of Colorado, but it's now national and growing. They place nurses, maternal and pediatric nurses with newborn, with mothers and with first pregnancy mothers through pregnancy through the first 2 years of life. And what they do is they hook up to the kinds of services. Unfortunately, because of the federal government, the 0 to 3 and this program are competing for funds. Fortunately, well, for my wife, fortunately, they're getting a lot of funds right now. But again, these are the programs that shouldn't be competing. They should just simply be continually expanding. And both of these programs, and there are a number of other programs, some on the state level, that are. What's interesting is the data. When we talk about data, the data on these kinds of early intervention programs is incredibly successful. I even gave it to my brother, who's a sociologist, who's always very dismissive of this kind of data. He said, well, it actually is pretty good. And so there you got it. This is again coming back to the initial presentation that Kevin started from the archives and Phil Bennett did on Reich's idea. That's the idea. Here it is. It's becoming, but there's still incredible resistance.
Go ahead, Al.
I just realized this is more of a comment, but when you mentioned the people in Portland, everyone's walking around talking to their babies and all that, and they haven't been to one of these meetings, no. So.
That's true. I can attest to that.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. So I'm just wondering, if the word is
It's in the
kind
water.
of being,
It's
in
there.
the water.
It's there.
It's in the
Yeah.
water.
No, the idea's out there.
Actually, I'd like to pick up on that because I have my little session to talk about today. Definitely, the rest of the world is beginning to catch up with Reich. Not with the same depth or intensity or smarts or anything, but some of the concepts are in there. And you go out of the grocery store and pick up a magazine, it'll tell you some of this stuff, right? But nobody, and other people have said this, nobody has really addressed genital development. That is the one unique thing that we've got that nobody else knows anything about, cares about, dares talk about, and frankly, what are we doing about it? I mean, I'll speak, I'm not. But we need to really think about that.
Anyone
I'd love
else?
to hear what you all
I'm
say
sorry.
about it.
Anyone else who hasn't yet asked a question, before we go to repeat questioners? Anyone who hasn't had a chance to speak yet today?
You had a question?
No,
You had a question.
oh, yes, please.
I've asked one already.
Oh, okay. Anyone else before?
That's it.
Okay, then, here's the order, then Norman, therapist, and person. Norman, please.
Okay, Reich talks about the idea of Dr. Shippen, you mentioned Sandy's genitalia.
Yeah.
That one ran a big bell with me because Reich stays down half of the chapter talking about people that criticize him for always talking about sexuality. That's all you talk about, Dr. Reich. These are his words, as I remember. And he said that's like saying, well, we're going to talk about a train and talk about its parts and what makes it run, and we're going to leave out the steam. And that's what sexuality is. That's the steam. If you don't talk about sexuality, nothing else makes a difference.
I think that's what Dorothy is saying. But the question out there,
How?
I think, is the key question I think that you're supporting is what, in a sense, in a room like this, and many of you are in one way or another involved, actively or have been. What do we do about it other than have meetings and preach to the converted?
Raise their own children.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting point.
We raise our children. That's what Dr. Sobey used to always say. Weed your own garden. Please.
I'm curious whether you people have been exposed to Rudolph Laban's work and the work of Marion Moore, because her work, Laban was the person who developed the system of movement analysis that's used across many different disciplines, the psychology, the theater,
What kind of
etc.
analysis?
Lab on movement analysis.
Movement.
Movement.
Not
And
bowel movement.
essentially, lab on
Who's
work.
this?
Well, but he also worked from the same premises, right, which was that the way that we inhabit our bodies and the way that we move is an expression of everything about us. Marion North did a longitudinal study starting from day one, following babies from day one to age 21, looking at personality development across that whole period of time. And what she found was that from day one, the personality and the temperament.
Did she document the genital development?
I'll have to go and look
Yeah.
in her book and see.
No, I mean, I know both work, and neither one of them really approach the issue of genitality. And again, it's not, it's just, the problem is that for reasons that are probably far beyond, maybe we should do a whole day on it, for reasons that are, you know, all too, you know, basically in terms of what Norman is saying, like pointed out, it doesn't get, you know, even people get close to it and then they pull back. Laban particularly gets, you know, he's very interested in movement, he's very clear about movement, and you know, and then it becomes mechanical. And not so much with him, it becomes mechanical in people that have used it and picked it
He
up.
does dance notation.
Well, that became.
Dance notation is one stream. The lab-on analysis looks at the entire dynamics.
But
of the way
it
that
doesn't touch genitality.
I
And
do.
neither does Norman.
I don't have cause to say this, but there are several very good books out for little kids about sexual development for ages 3 to 6. And so I would really recommend that you get them. One of them is by Mark Brown, who does the Arthur series called What's the Big Secret? And there's 2 or 3 others. They're excellent. Good graphic pictures. One of them is called What's the Big Deal? One of them is It's Absolutely Normal. There are a whole lot of good books now.
So do you deal with genitality with your
Yeah, but what does that mean? I mean, that means every opportunity I have to talk to parents about it, yes, I do. And kids talk to me about it. And what I'm thinking is that I should start writing up what the kids have said and ask all of you to do the same. And then we pool it, you know, and see what we come up with.
Sir, please.
Mysticism notwithstanding, how can you have attachment without love?
How can you, well, according to attachment theorists, it's out of those interactions that love is born. So it's not that you can't have attachment without love, you can't have love without attachment.
Tom, please.
I want to bring up a couple things about attachment because that's so interesting. But first I wanted to finish my point about self-regulation because I want to
Please,
take the time
please do.
together. And that's that whenever you have, let's just say, 2 people interacting, there's 3 organisms there. There's the 2 individuals and there's the relationship organism, of which the 2 people are both organs. That is a real functional organism.
Yes.
And that's self-regulating. So that's the social self-regulating organism as distinct from the individual self-regulation.
You hope it's somewhere.
Huh?
You hope it's somewhere.
You're next.
Do you want to comment?
No, go ahead and finish your comment, and then Eric will.
I've got a clarification, part statement,
Okay.
part question.
Yes.
In attachment theory, when you're talking about alleviating the distress,
Yeah.
just in case that could be misinterpreted, I don't think that means, or I don't know if they mean this. I don't think that means, like somebody might want to make sure that the child doesn't get too upset,
No.
as opposed to just being there with them through the full expression.
Right. That's right. If you, exactly. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the kind of when they talk about what kind of interactions, what kind of ways of being with the other, yeah, it wouldn't be a way of shut that down, or I'm coming from my anxiety, so I want you to stop that, which is what I'm kind of inferring into what you're saying. No, it's a way. There's a kind of a soothing that kind of goes on, and you're, you know, if you have language, but even if the child doesn't have language, oh, you're upset, oh, you know, and just kind of giving that kind of in the way, in your intonations, in the way you hold, in your facial expressions, that there becomes a kind of this meeting and then we'll let it go. Not that exactly what you're saying, yes.
As a matter of fact, Bowlby points out very, very clearly, and so does Stern, a number of them, that by doing just the opposite of, shutting it down or making it okay or calming the child in the sense of getting the child to stop behaving in this distressed way without genuine attunement, genuine connection, what you will do is create what we would basically call an attachment disorder. You won't create genuine attachment or genuine movement. You will basically, what we would call, you basically begin to establish, I think what Dr. Schiff was trying to get at, the beginnings of not just armoring, but of the rigidity in situation, rather than the ebb and flow and give and take of one secure. If one follows the literature, when you read descriptions of secure attachment relationships, it is genuinely a pulsatory process. In Bowlby's work, it's described as a pulsatory process. If you read Dan Stern's descriptions of a successful attunement, it's a pulsatory, organismic process. And it really is. If you look at biological, if you look at the films of Dan Stern's films of mother-infant interactions, which are much freer than the specific ones that you saw here, it's just wonderful. It's just delightful.
One more just related to the energy observation, especially for therapists, say, read experiences. Because there's two parts to this. One, I've noticed when somebody goes into that, a distress state or an emotional state, sometimes there's something, part of what I think is happening with contact is if the energy is more intense than what they can tolerate, the contact, you help carry some of the energy for them. I think literally. Whether it's literally the physical touch or the eye contact or the right words, you're actually helping in that social organism, helping carry some of that load, which otherwise they would just collapse and shut down. And the complement to that is that in the unhealthy aspect, is I think that becomes the basis energetically for when people displace responsibility. There's this where under healthy circumstances you would carry energy for somebody. When that isn't done developmentally, then you have a tendency to give your energy to other people and make them responsible for your issues. It's an observation.
Eric, please.
I want to make, as briefly as I can, some comments about the attachment theory business. I have to say, at first, I'm not a student of attachment theory. I don't know much about it. But I am a student of psychoanalysis, and my understanding of why psychoanalysts don't like attachment theory is quite simply what psychoanalysts about it.
Right.
They don't dispute the findings, the observations, but as far as I know, Bowlby made no attempt to impose a psychoanalytic model, by which I mean, in simple terms, the unconscious and drive theory, sexuality and aggression.
He's very clear, as a matter of fact, he makes it very clear in his preface to attachment that he's not offering this as an alternative to psychoanalytic dynamic theory.
Now, it seems to me possibly an artificial exercise to try to rehabilitate attachment theory and make it out to be either psychoanalytic or Reichian or economic, although I don't have any objection to anyone using his observations to enrich either of the two theories. But why not enrich it with the unconscious and unconscious conflict and libidinal development, as well as either or with organ energy?
Can I make a...
I was surprised to learn that he was a student of Melanie Kahn. Melanie Kahn is the other extreme. I mean, she assumed that intrapsychic processes, projection, introjection, and even a primitive Oedipus complex existed already in the first 3 months of life.
I'm...
Bowlby kind of assumed they didn't exist at all.
I'm interested in what you say because it seems that... Well, I'll speak while I'm still interested. Yeah, please. Yeah. Okay. Well, my take is a little different than yours, because I'm seeing, because psychoanalysis has changed so much, and there's so many different kind of, maybe schools of psychoanalysis or evolutions of psychoanalysis, that in fact, there is a merger that's going on. The object relation psychoanalyst.
There's no object relations in it at all, as far as I can
No, there is. In Bowlby's work, there's the whole idea of the working model. There is the intrapsychic kind of schema in terms of how relationships work to soothe or not soothe. It gets lodged within that schema, and that's that would be fit with the object relations part. And object relations theorists would speak about it within that terminology, but it would be very similar to the working model from the idea of Bowlby. So in that sense, it fits. And then it's also
more with self-psychology.
yeah. Well, you know, if you really look at self-psychology in terms of Kohut's work, in terms of those early mirroring, I mean, it's just like step. So I think in those areas there is a merger and an embracing.
The second thing I wanted to say, we're more focused on the idea of contact and energy. It doesn't seem to me wrong to conceptualize an interpersonal relationship in terms of pulsation. It seems to me much more natural to conceptualize it in terms of superimposition of two energy fields. And that gives you the advantage conceptually of saying that the gratification that you obtain in an interpersonal relationship is similar to, qualitatively but not quantitatively as intense as orgasmic superimposition. And also that one has a relationship not only with another person, but also with the cosmos, with the environment in general. An infant can be excited by inanimate objects and also by, presumably, by the atmosphere and by the sky and the heavenly so-called objects. And we tend to think of that as because of our tradition, having read cosmic superimposition, to the extent that Reich was able to elucidate those functions, we understand that as the superimposition of the pulsatory energy field with the orgone energy that exists in other forms. So I would object to the idea that an interpersonal relationship involves a single pulsating system. I would see it as two separate systems with the possible exception of the orgasm itself.
Anyone else have some questions who hasn't been around for the 14th time or something?
Not
Let me.
tonight,
Oh,
absolutely.
I have a couple. I have one for Dr. Lewis myself. But let me ask you this: should I call Peter back? Are any specific questions around Peter's? Guess, please. What would?
I've got one more this time.
Well, let's hear the question. Maybe we can answer it. Otherwise, I will call.
All right. In the hospital setting, how do you get the physicians and the nurses on board?
Yeah, he doesn't, and this is what he does is stealth work. He does not try to convince. He tries to get his co-midwives interested, and he has been successful with some. And he's been trying to work with young midwives in training to get them to have this perspective. But he does this without naming it. He just says, "Let's help you breathe a little bit. Maybe this will make your labor a little easier." So he does this all without trying to convince doctors or nurses or anyone else. But apparently, from talking with him, when on the ward, he has a lot of autonomy. When he's actually working with someone who's giving birth, and they work in teams. So he works with a second midwife, and since he's an elder and has been doing this a long time, often it's someone in training, so there's not the conflict. And he does it. That I don't know.
No, yeah, it's very different here. No, there's different, midwifery is completely different than outside the United States.
Yeah.
I did that with my younger son.
Yeah.
Well, no,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
interviewed doctors, so we got a doctor that was in agreement, that was willing to do what we wanted to do. And we did the entire thing, up and down, and
We could feel when the time came for the birth, the doctor was on vacation.
Good thing. I mean, we all know of the alarming increase in statistics of cesareans, which have nothing to do with medical necessity and everything to do with convenience of both physicians and moms. And I think this is a real problem, especially if Montague, I thought Montague's point was just so
Brilliant.
fascinating. You know, if that's correct, then you think of all these poor babies who don't have that overall body experience of coming through the birth canal and being pushed through that Mitzrayim, through that narrow place, you know, and into the world, and lack that experience.
And research shows it's detrimental for the moms too. I used to work at UMass as a researcher who was doing research on just that. And she was actually working with hamsters and giving them C-sections and seeing what happens with their neurotransmitters. So very mechanistically approach them, which means that the outcomes are really detrimental, and they show higher rates of postpartum depression, and it really is considered both have and mother.
Yeah.
There are specific hormones that are released in
Right,
that,
exactly.
in childbirth that not only beneficial for the necessary for the mother's body to coordinate it, but for the child's body. And so, you know, I mean, obviously, if it's a matter of life and death, you do whatever you have to do.
Sure.
But in natural circumstances, it's obvious that there's, you know, it's like if we were meant to fly, we'd have wings. We don't have. If you were meant to give birth some other way, that's the way it would have been designed. There's a reason why. You know, one last thing I wanted to say is interesting about these things that Peter was talking about, is that consider this: pygmies, you know, forest pygmies, who never go above 4'2", 4'3", naturally. I mean, they're genetically, you know, designed. Give birth, right, to babies that on average are 7 pounds 6 ounces. You know, normal, you know, child size, right? And according to all the anthropological accounts of observed pygmy women birthing, which they do near usually running water, not in running water, but near running water, show no signs of prolonged labor, and usually, you know, as long as the birth is successful. I mean, I'm not talking about death rates in delivery here, but the births are relatively what we would call painless as labor goes. Relatively, they don't show great signs of distress or crying or screaming or yelling, and yet they're delivering babies that are almost as big as they are. So the question about that is what we're seeing by the time we see the kind of labor that we're looking at, even in the best of circumstances, what are we seeing? Well, what we're seeing from where we started in some of the early comments of being right is we're seeing armored organisms, even the healthiest of a mother delivering is already an armored organism who is delivering, so we're not sure what we're really seeing and what it would look like if it was you know, less, or if it was more natural.
Well, this was my question to you, but maybe you've just answered about Bowlby. Since he wasn't screening or doing any interventions during the pregnancy, the babies that were coming into the world were not in a, quote, natural state. You know, and that doesn't mean that the data isn't interesting. I think the data in the horrific film, in one sense, that you showed us, Dorothy, is very, very important. But, you know, there was no attempt to combat some of the standard stuff about what you should or should not do when you're pregnant. And no attempt to look at the armoring of the woman, no attempt to look at what kind of labor the woman experienced, what kind of birth was being given. So I think that shows a kind of limitation on this kind of empirical
Well,
theory.
in defense of that, let me say that Bowlby's data was not data that he generated himself necessarily. So he was looking at a wide range of data, and what he did that I think was quite unique was that a good part of Bowlby's data is cross-cultural and also cross-species.
Then it's
He was doing incredible, he was extremely interested in primatology and animal behavior because, as Dr. Weitzer was saying, he wasn't particularly interested in the unconscious or the psychodynamic models. He was much more interested in understanding primary biological and biosocial behaviors. So in that sense, his data is, for me, has always been much more
Okay,
interesting
I
and in
missed
some way
that.
much more valuable in connection to Reich's work from the roundabout way. But I think your point is well taken.
I would like to give the panelists each a chance to make one last statement, and then we're going to go places, do the windows, then we're going to do the voting. Any summary statement you want to make?
Don't feel compelled.
Give them a chance, because I'm springing this on people. I'm springing this on them so they don't know they're gonna do this.
No, I want to thank Harry and Phil and for constantly advocating the efforts of the Wilhelm Reich Infant Trust. And I hope that we will have more scholars and researchers at the archives. What we've seen is afraid of what we were going to see, of what I thought we were going to see, is the fact that the effects of this public and official perception of Reich in America has really squelched so many things. And I think that among many people, they thought that 50 years after Reich died and the archives would become accessible and all sorts of things would change and all kinds of people would come out of the woodwork to look at the files, and people from the government and people from cancer research and all kinds of things. Nothing like that has happened.
Yeah.
I will be completely frank and say less than a dozen people have gone into the archives, and they've been open for close to a year. And I don't attribute that to our access policies and procedures, which are completely honest and transparent. I think that there is just a basic overall lack of widespread interest in Reich's work, and I think we're seeing still the effects of what happened 50 years ago. And I hope that perhaps there
Louis,
might be
we'll
some
do that
major
later.
breakthroughs.
Leave it alone.
But thank you for letting me, inviting me here to talk, Harry.
You can take those home. Well, you know, just piggybacking on that, I don't know if you saw in the update, I recently noticed that the link to Reich's FBI file was no longer an active link. So I contacted the FBI. I called up the FBI, saying, hey, how are you doing? And I was told that they had a policy to take down links to files if they hadn't been consulted within a given year, 3 times within a given year for a period of years. And they claimed that no one was looking at the Reich FBI files, and so they took down the link. Now, that may have been bullshit, but it could have been serious, and maybe this is maybe a good opportunity. It's both a calamity and an opportunity. The calamity is no interest. The opportunity is that maybe getting word out there to a new generation that will not have the knee-jerk reaction, oh, you mean the guy with the orgone box, that crazy guy. This is a new opportunity, and that's why the writing I'm doing, I'm trying to get published in peer-reviewed academic journals rather than in so-called Reichian journals, so that more and more people are exposed to the wealth of this work. In terms of the OIRC, I didn't approach this as a scholarly effort, you know, to do this. I was just sort of following up on Dr. Lewis's suggestion, but I think it would be worth publicizing this early attempt to try to figure something out. And so after I write a bunch of other things, I do want to turn this into a real writing. That's my concluding statement. Let's go down the road.
You know, I guess my concluding statement is it's a real pleasure to be, you know, with everybody here. And I felt really kind of, I mean, I always enjoy kind of coming to these things and seeing everyone's interest, but also as this has been growing and being able to build upon what, you know, was presented before, I think there's an expansion here, and it really, you know, exactly, inhalation and exhalation, yeah. And so I'm always moved by that, and I'm very appreciative to all of you for being here, but also engaging in these conversations. And also to kind of, you know, this is all, for me, a work in progress. You know, it's like, it's a continual struggling with some of these ideas. You know, is it pulsation? Is it superimposition? What is contact? I mean, all these things that, you know, I don't know, I've been in this field a long time, and I still don't really know all that much about, or know somewhat about, or continually kind of with. So it's nice to be able to have a forum to share that and to talk about it. What? Attached?
I'd like to say that I really enjoyed listening to you all. I learned a lot, it was great, and that it was terrific to see so many people interested in children. It just is thrilling to me. And if there were any way that we could use this as a forum to build on going forward, as a group organization. I don't know what Dr. Lewis does here.
Really, what does he do?
But he's good. It would just be fantastic if we could somehow use the energy and brains and skills and experience in this room. I mean, it's, you know, from the osteopath to the social workers to the dance therapists, educators, I mean, the skill in here is enormous. And it'd be great if we knew how to go forward with it.
Well, I wanted to thank, Phil Bennett, he really was this, as much as he pretends that I just asked him to do it and he just did it, he took a very active role and really made it much more organized than I probably would have. And he keeps us honest, keeps people honest.
Oh, and I forgot to thank Dr. Silver.
Doctor.
I promoted you, I made you into a doctor.
Because she picked it up from
He's going to raise his rates now.
And Kevin was thanking us for, support of the, but in fact, the work that Kevin does and Mary Higgins has done for years has made it possible for even what remains of this to continue. That said, as far as continuing, I think one of the things that I've been pleased is to see increasing numbers of people who haven't seen before, but you got to get in touch with people you know to come to events, and we'll keep holding events, and then hopefully we can build new ideas, and if people come again, we can begin, and so we'll do something again in the spring, and I want to thank them, but I think we do have to get going because I noticed the maintenance man who wants to get his evening finished, so we have to respect that. Yeah.
Would we have access to the email list? Because this was a
Yeah, I think if we can, I can't technically do it. Once it gets done, I can arrange for Dr. Silver or Dr. Schiff, who knows something about email material, to be shared. If everybody, as we said, if you indicate that you didn't want your information
That's for your
shared,
use,
we
I
will
don't know.
provide